From strength to strength. What happens when success stops being enough? As doctors, we spend years pursuing expertise. We study, train, pass exams, build our careers, gain experience, and slowly earn the trust of our patients and colleagues. Much of our identity becomes tied to being competent, productive, and useful. And for most of our careers, that strategy works. The harder we work, the more capable we become. The more capable we become, the more opportunities we receive. But while reading Arthur Brooks' book From Strength to Strength, I found myself confronted by an uncomfortable question. What happens when the strength that made us successful begin to fade? Not because we have failed, not because we have stopped working hard, but because that is simply part of being human. At first glance, From Strength to Strength looks like a book about aging and career decline. But after reading it, I think it's really a book about something much deeper. It's a book about how ambitious people can transition from a life organized around achievement to a life organized around wisdom, love, service, and meaning. Brooks begins with what he calls the striver's curse. People who strive for excellence often end up finding their inevitable decline terrifying, their successes increasingly unsatisfying, and their relationships lacking. As I read this, I realized that many of us spend decades climbing a ladder without ever asking whether it is leaning against the right wall. The problem is that success creates a powerful illusion. We start believing that if we can just achieve a little more, earn a little more, publish a little more, become a little more respected, then happiness will finally arrive. But it never does. Brooks references Stein's law. If something cannot go on forever, it will stop. We all know this intellectually, but we often behave as though our peak performance will continue indefinitely. Research shows that in many professions, peak creative output occurs surprisingly early. The abilities that help us rise during the first half of life eventually begin to decline. The reason is partly biological. As we age, changes occur in the brain. Fluid intelligence, the ability to reason quickly, innovate, solve problems, and process information rapidly gradually decreases. For higher achievers, this can feel threatening. Many people are not actually afraid of getting older. They are afraid of becoming irrelevant. They are afraid of no longer being needed. And that fear can quietly become an obsession. One of the most fascinating ideas in the book is that success can become addictive. At first, achievement feels rewarding. Then we adapt. Then we need more. Soon we find ourselves running on what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill. We keep moving, but we never really arrive. Brooks summarizes the trap with three formulas. Satisfaction equals continually getting what you want. Success equals continually having more than others. Failure equals having less. The problem is that none of these formulas can ever produce lasting contentment. A fourth formula Brooks shares with us is satisfaction equals what you have divided by what you want. In other words, happiness depends not only on what we possess, but on what we desire. The more our desires expand, the harder satisfaction becomes. This is why Brooks argues that happiness is not primarily about increasing what we have, it is about managing what we want. Not asking what else can I achieve, but asking why do I want it. One practical exercise he recommends is reversing the traditional bucket list. Instead of listing everything you want to accomplish before you die, imagine yourself 5 years from now living peacefully and happily. Then ask what is most responsible for that happiness. What relationships, what habits, what values, what activities. Then remove the goals that compete with those things. This will shift the focus from achievement to alignment. Another major theme in the book is the transition from what Brooks calls the first curve to the second curve. The first curve is built largely on fluid intelligence. The second curve is built on crystallized intelligence. While younger people often excel at innovation, speed, and rapid learning, older people frequently become better at teaching, mentoring, communicating, integrating knowledge, and understanding complexity. When you are young, you have raw intelligence. When you are older, you have wisdom, and wisdom may be even more valuable. The tragedy Brooks argues is that many people continue trying to play the first game long after life is inviting them to play the second. Instead of moving toward teaching, mentoring, counseling, and service, they cling to the identity that made them successful earlier in life. The result is frustration, of course. The challenge is accepting that what got us through the first half of life may not get us through the second half. This requires humility. It requires letting go of prestige. It requires recognizing that our worth is greater than our performance. One idea I found particularly powerful was Brooks' discussion of self objectification. We begin viewing ourselves as products. We measure our value by our titles, accomplishments, status, and recognition. But when we reduce ourselves to our achievements, we inevitably suffer when those achievements fade. Success becomes less of a blessing and more of a prison. The book repeatedly returns to a simple truth. You don't need to be special to be happy. In fact, many people who choose being special over being happy end up miserable. They become trapped by social comparison, perfectionism, fear of failure, and the constant need for validation. He quotes another, naming comparison as the thief of joy. Brooks suggests that the antidote is humility, not thinking less of yourself, but thinking about yourself less, not accumulating more identities, but stripping away the false ones. The deeper I got into the book, the more I realized that Brooks is not really writing about success. He's writing about love. Throughout the book, he emphasizes that the people who age best are not necessarily the most accomplished, they are the most connected. He shares research work showing that stable relationships, healthy habits, adaptive coping skills, meaningful friendship, and loving partnerships predict well being far more reliably than status or wealth. He also quotes a researcher summarizing happiness with two pillars. First is love, and the second one, finding a way to live that does not push love away. Many high achieving professions push us away from living love and lead us to loneliness. Brooks notes that loneliness is not the same as being alone. Solitude can be peaceful. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected. And one of the strongest protections against loneliness is friendship, not networking, not professional contacts. It's real friendship, the kind Aristotle described as willing the good of another person for their own sake, the kind that teaches, supports, challenges, and strengthens us, the kind that remains when careers, titles, and achievements disappear. The book also explores mortality. Many of us avoid thinking about death because it feels uncomfortable. Yet Brooks argues that awareness of mortality can actually help us to live better. When we remember that our time is limited, we become more intentional. We focus less on resume virtues and more on eulogy virtues. Not what impresses people, but what matters to us. Not what we achieved, but who we became and who we loved. One of the most comforting ideas in the book is that weakness itself has value. Our culture celebrates strength, competence, and independence. Yet Brooks suggests that weakness often creates opportunities for connection. It's through vulnerability, loss, transition, and decline that we frequently develop our deepest relationships and discover our greatest wisdom. Weakness is not simply something to endure, it can become a teacher. The final chapter discusses life transitions and what Brooks calls liminality, the space between old identities and new ones. Career changes, retirement, unexpected setbacks, and new chapters. Most people experience these transitions repeatedly throughout life. The key is not resisting them, the key is learning from them. Brooks encourages us to focus less on prestige and more on purpose, less on linear careers and more on what he calls spiral careers, careers that build on previous experience while evolving toward new forms of contribution. Perhaps the most beautiful lesson in the book is that decline doesn't have to be the end of growth. It can be the beginning of a different kind of growth, a movement away from striving and toward wisdom, away from comparison and toward contentment, away from status and toward service, away from achievement and toward love. Brooks ends with a simple formula for a meaningful life: use things, love people, worship the divine. I wish you happy reading.